Okay, so we have Photoshop open and we're gonna go ahead and move to part 2, which is recreating that image composition. So I actually already did that, just so that we can see it sort of before we start. So this is, I'm gonna close this because we don't need this at the bottom. This is the finished product, okay? So this is what our image is gonna look like. As you can see, it was based off of the original image we pulled off of the web, and so it still has those 3 parts. It has, the sort of subject in the middle, it has the lake, and then it has sort of this background forest with the trees, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and recreate this together. So the first thing you're gonna do is go to File, New, okay? And we're gonna navigate to the top where it says Print, okay? So you can find a print preset. Then click on A4, okay? That is sort of a standard size page. You can also pick letter or legal, sort of depends on your area, but A4 is an international standard page size. And then you're going to go ahead and change the orientation. Right now you see that it is vertical to horizontal. Okay? So click on the horizontal until it turns blue, and then go ahead and hit create. So this is your base for your composition. Usually with multi-image compositions, you're going to start with sort of a blank base, just so you can sort of organize your files and so you don't actually start with an image file. Because, for example, if we had started with one of our image files, but then we had to make a selection and cut it out, there would be nothing behind that, right? And this way, by creating a white base, we have a canvas for the size of our image, okay? So now I'm going to go to the top and go to File, Place Embedded, and we're going to place our first sort of, photo. So I have should have a folder here with the images that we're going to use. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and open the lake image. So here it is. Here's our lake. Okay. And now we're not going to use these trees. We're going to get rid of those and replace them with a new background. So the first thing that you're going to do is you have to select the lake and cut it out. Now, there's a number of ways of doing this. So I'm going to show you one way that you could, but I wouldn't recommend it. So go ahead and just watch through this first before trying your own selection. If I use Object Selection Tool, okay, which is the second down from the right column, and I go ahead and, draw sort of my boundary on the lake and let it select the lake, okay, so you can see that it has selected this lake here with the dotted line. And then I go ahead and hit the mask button with the lake layer selected. It does cut out the lake, right? But here's the problem. It's that if you now go and put a new background behind it, the object selection tool did not take sort of the boundary of dirt around the lake. And so it's going to look super unnatural to not have that boundary there. So I prefer to do it differently. So I'm going to go ahead and undo this, okay? And also deselect. And I'm going to select my lasso tool, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sort of sorry I messed up there. I'm going to make my own rough selection around the lake, okay? Now I'm going to hit the masking button. And now with the mask selected, so you're going to go to the lake layer and click on the mask. You're going to go to your brush tool, and remember, white is visible, black is invisible. So you want your foreground color set to black because now we're trying to make all the trees invisible. You're going to set your brush, I don't know, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger now because I want to try to not spend too much time doing this for the tutorial. And move my hardness to, I don't know, 50, 60%, okay? And then I'm going to go in and I'm just going to brush away until I'm touching the, I still want to be able to see the dirt. but I'm using sort of this soft brush because nature is never perfect. And that's a really good rule to know when you're doing these sort of things, is that if you create any sort of harsh lines, those stand out a lot because you're working with, very natural scenes where, forest is never going to have a straight line. So if I worked with a really hard brush, I would have a more unnatural looking image. It's also worth it to note that I'm rushing this. Normally I would zoom in and you would spend a lot, do a much better selection, but kind of rushing this. So, and again, it doesn't really need to be perfect because we're going to put in our own sort of similar background. So it's all going to sort of merge together. But I went ahead and deleted. Okay. So now I still have this sort of border around, right? And so now our lake layer is done. So you can go ahead and rename this to lake. Okay, so go to layer, rename layer, and name it lake. Okay. Next image that we're going to put in is our background. So here it's super simple. You're going to go to File, Place Embedded. I'm going to select my trees, click on Place. Okay. Now I'm going to use the transform tool, like the move tool, to expand this image so that it fully fits my page. Okay. And hit the little check mark on the top. And now we need to drag this image below the image of the lake. So in the layer tab, you're going to go over the image, click and drag underneath the lake. Okay? So this already looks okay. It looks like it's emerging well enough, right? Now though, there is something that we can do that make this more realistic. And you have to think about a lot the context of the images. So I chose this lake because there were a lot of clouds on the lake. And the background also had a lot of clouds. So I knew that that would merge together. But here, where there's these, sort of clouds over right here that seem to drift on top of the lake, this harsh line, that ends the clouds where the lake begins, is unnatural. So to do that, I need to sort of erase a little bit of the lake to show the clouds underneath it, because the cloud layer is behind the lake. So I'm going to go back to the masking tab of my lake image. So I'm going to click on the mask of my lake. I'm going to go back to a black brush. I'm going to make it really big. Okay, so about this big. I'm at 240, we'll say. Make the hardness really soft, so maybe like 30%. Okay. And then you're going to make the opacity, which is on that same top toolbar, like 35%. Okay. This basically means that you're barely erasing. So now when I brush over, look at that, you can see that I'm sort of exposing the clouds behind the lake. And if I keep sort of, you sort of brush and then you let go, and you brush and then you let go. And if you mess up, like here, I sort of erase and you can see the trees behind. You can switch back to white and you can sort of heal that. Okay. So here I sort of brushed. To me, it looks good. And then here in this corner right here on the left of the lake, I also feel like I can sort of let those clouds come in. And oh, I see the trees too much, so I'm going to switch. Sort of go back to white, fill in those trees. And then, I like the idea of seeing the trees around the edge as sort of a reflection. So I'm going to go back to black. Sort of going to go around the edges of the lake in some places so you can see sort of the trees underneath it. And you're just kind of giving it this whole feel of, blending into each other. Okay? Okay, so now to me, this looks a lot more realistic. Now, we can go ahead and rename the tree layer trees. Okay? Okay. Now, go ahead and select your top layer because we're going to place something on top of it. So select the lake layer, then go to File, Place Embedded, and you're going to click on the drone shot of the shipwreck. Okay. Now, first thing we're going to do is resize this. Okay. I'm going to say this looks about right. Okay. And hit the check mark. Now, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the lake, is that we're going to go to the lasso tool. We're going to make rough selection here. Okay. And I made it kind of wavy for a reason, and I'm going to show you why in a second. And then you're going to hit mask. Okay. Now, two problems. One, obviously the selection is way too harsh, and you see the line. And two, the blue of the waters that this wreck was in is way too turquoise compared to the blue of the lake. So we're going to use something called an adjustment layer to adjust that. So you're going to go ahead and at the bottom where you have your masking tab, to the right of the masking button is a circle half filled with like a whitish gray. You're going to click on that and select hue and saturation. Okay. Now, this is an adjustment layer that changes the hue, saturation, and lightness of your image. And another super important step to remember is that layers affect all of the layers below them. So right now, if I change the hue, there's a slider up here, and I change the hue to, all the way to the left, you can see that it changed my entire image. So again, I'm sliding the hue, it's changing the whole picture, okay? And so I need to find a way to make it so that it only changes the submarine photo or the shipwreck and not also the trees in the lake as well. So to do that, I'm going to reset it here for you. We're going to clip it. And so clipping in Photoshop basically means that you link one layer to another so that it only impacts the layer you linked it to. It's like holding hands with someone. When you're in a crowd, you hold hands with someone, you're linking yourself to them so that you sort of have that connection that nobody else has. So with the hue and saturation layer selected, you're going to go to the top where it says layer, and then click on create clipping mask. And this is going to link that hue and saturation layer to the layer below it. Okay? You're going to know that it worked if you see this little arrow pointing downwards to the right of the eye on the hue and saturation layer. Okay? This now means that if I change the hue, you can see that it's only affecting the shipwreck. With that in mind, I'm now going to move the hue until, I'm sort of getting that darker blue. And I'm also going to play with the lightness, okay? So you have to sort of fix the sliders of the saturation, the lightness, and the hue till you get something that looks similar to you. And this to me looks like a much closer match. Now we need to try to blend this into the lake better. So go ahead and select your wreck layer. Okay, it's going to be below the hue and saturation layer. And the first thing we're going to do is change the blending mode from normal to, let's just take a look at what sort of looks good here. I'm looking. I kind of like the hard light, okay? So I'm going to click on hard light, and now the next thing I'm going to do is reduce the opacity. So I'm going to go to the right of where I adjusted the blending mode. There's an opacity slider, and I'm going to also sort of mess with that, okay? And now the next thing I'm going to do is click on that mask, the mask of the wreck layer, okay? So click on the mask that's to the right of it. go to your brush, set it to black, okay? And again, we're going to keep it like we had earlier with the opacity at 35, making it really, really soft, so the hardness is around 30. And I'm just going to bring the size down a bit, but not much. And look at this. I'm going to slowly brush it over the edges of my selection, okay? And you kind of have to go over it multiple times, sort of less and less each time, okay? But it just takes a little bit of patience, but you're sort of doing like a gradient blend here. Because it's like you're sort of having the power to decide how much you erase and what areas, all of that. Okay. And I'm just going to kind of, because I'm not fully erasing it, I'm trying to blend it in. Okay. And then maybe I'm going to reduce the opacity a little bit more. Okay. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay. Now keep in mind, if I still don't like this sort of turquoise haze around it, I can go back to the hue and saturation layer and reduce the saturation even more. Okay, and that sort of disappeared now. So there we go. That is the tutorial. I hope that you learned something, and let me know if you have any questions.